basically show you, like, to just wrap up my overall passion is for big, colourful things, fundamentally. There's a lot of kind of meandering stories as to like how I got to the point where I just want to make very large, colourful things. This is a commission in 2017 to design an idea for a new type of British town hall. And obviously, I went a little bit wild, but the idea is for a framework for not digital changing art, not projections, but decorative art on a building which is made by lots of different artists and different people with permanent materials, decorating a city in a way that a kind of ancient building would, but using new technologies and new designers in today's world. And as you can see, we'll come to the postmodern stuff later, but it's obviously very postmodern with lots of references. And this is one of the interiors. And the other passion is for kind of gorgeous little interior objects and designing interiors in a way that I think was summarized best by someone who visited my studio. This is my studio. They visited my studio the other day, which is, oh, your aesthetic is very gay, Sir John Soane's. Which is, I think, very apt. So basically, like, all of the stuff that you're going to see after this is just like big and colourful in the city, and then gay Sir John Soane's. And then with lots of kind of theoretical fluff. But to begin at the beginning, I studied at the Architectural Association in the early 2000s. And, you know, one is formed by the things which one grows up in opposition against. And the school was dominated by the kind of parametric school where you had to do lots of very complicated things that looked like alien squid. Was pretty much the way I would describe it. And there was very little, so lots of people wearing black, presenting black alien squid models, everyone being really, you know, tutors being incredibly mean to people using big German and French words that no one understood, and then students kind of crying in the corridor afterwards. And I sort of turned up and I was like, well, what about all this colourful stuff? And I came with a kind of quite a passion because I had been kicked out of school as a teenager and ended up on the gay scene in Soho kind of very young, and had a lot of really, really wonderful, exciting experiences working in design in the kind of gay scene, also protesting, but then just being embedded in a world that was quite wealthy, really exciting, and was very much expressing itself visually and aesthetically through nightclubs, fashion, graphic design, restaurants, protest art, and it was all kind of bubbling and happening at the same time, and I was very privileged to be part of that. And then I went to architecture school and I wanted to talk about this stuff in the architecture that I was designing. But everyone was doing that kind of stuff. So, and I was like, and they were just like, what are you, postmodernist? And I was like, I don't even know what postmodernist is, I'm just gay and I want to do like colourful things. So throughout the course of the kind of five years, I ended up effectively becoming a kind of much more extreme version of myself in my work than I would have otherwise been, because I was effectively having to make the polemical point, as I saw it, for architecture which could be expressive of identity, of cultural values, of, I guess, the word now, people use the word community. I wasn't thinking about it that way, but I guess it could be seen as that. Represented aesthetically in spatial terms, through colour, through pattern, through ornament. And these are 2 meter high panels from my final project in 2007. And they were really sort of polemical pieces. And I kind of tried to use each of the steps that we were taught at architecture school, which I loved. You know, it's very, you know, the incredible skills that you learn in architecture school were, you know, have stuck with me to this day. But at each step, from model making to the engineering and technical course through to the perspectival drawing, I tried to kind of bring this element that I felt was missing from the parametric discourse at the time of culture, identity, representation through ornament, pattern and colour into the project. So for instance, these are the model making which were done using 3D printing and laser cutting, and everyone was talking about digital fabrication at the time. And so I just tried to use the same tools, but use them for my ends, which was great because they couldn't fail me She gave me a great deal of skills and passions that I carry forward to this day, including the passion with a great interest in fabrication, in materials, putting things together, and using new technology with old materials to kind of create spectacular new effect. I use the word spectacular because these were voussoirs taken from the vaults that I designed for my final project over the spectacular staircases of a church that I designed in Rome, that were one-to-one travertine kind of structural elements that I made with a Italian marble stone quarry. And that's something that I've continued through to this day, which is I haven't necessarily been able to find a place in academic research, material research, but from the university, I was always reaching out to commercial companies and offering my services to them to explore, to companies looking at R&D with material processes, for them to use my designs to explore their new machines or new techniques that they were looking into, so that I could get sort of prototypes out and learn, and they would be able to get designs with their new machines that they could use for PR and press and stuff. And that's something that's continued throughout my work. You can see a few examples of those where you're like, how did he get that weird project done? It's normally because of that kind of setup. And this passion was taken forward. It's a stream of my work that's continued to this day, where it's mostly focused in on ceramics, but also on stone. And this idea of being able to take kind of materials that can then be crafted in a way that combines new fabrication technologies, but also handcrafting, so the two together. This was a course I taught at the Architectural Association called Digital Ceramics. I think it had to be called that because the only way that you could get a course was if you called it digital something. So it had to be called Digital Ceramics. I think now it would be Decolonized Ceramics or something. And then we would get a course. But it was a combination of using digital tools, but also like making models physically themselves, casting. They would then make the molds, cast the ceramics, fire the ceramics, glaze the ceramics, fire them again, and then mechanically assemble 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter rain screens. With their own proprietary sort of assemblage systems on them, and exploring kind of aesthetics through a process of hand making and digital design that were not taken from necessarily the tutors or for myself, but from their own individual stories. So each of these have a kind of stories from the background of the students rather than from sort of theoretical ideas of mine. And this is something that I continue to this day. So I design products for ceramic manufacturers and surface manufacturers, interiors and architecture surface manufacturers. These are some of the tiles. These are handmade tiles that are produced in Italy that I make now. And actually, this thread of kind of looking at the small scale was how my career started off after university, with a series of opportunities. So. Looking at the scale of the object that then built up gradually from there. This was the designer in residence at the Design Museum in 2013. It's a program that still goes on today. They give a 3-month support for designers, architect, designer, and artist every year. And I did a project looking at how digital fabrication could be used by the sort of paradigmatic 2010s designer to create objects without commercial constraints that were only talking about identity. So these are basically like noetic, they're poetic objects that are not about any sort of, they're intimately and carefully removed from any idea of function whatsoever. They're just about expressing identity. They were brought together in a kind of collection at the end of my residency for the show in the Design Museum, and that was sort of interestingly received. But it was received and got attention and led to a series of really important opportunities for me with brands to design objects, and that's a part of my kind of body of work or sort of stream of work that continues to this day, which I really enjoy, because each one of these objects I treat effectively in the same way as I would have treated like a large interior project or a large building, in terms of the amount of research that goes into it. So each one of these has a narrative, it has research backing to it, but then to an instantly consumable object that is all about atmosphere. And I'll tell you, you'll see throughout all of the projects that they're not about the narratives behind them. Are not part of the way I present the projects in the end. I remove that entirely, even though there's a lot of research and ideas behind it. The end result is only meant to be a consumable atmosphere. I had a research kind of agreement with a company in Omaha in Nebraska, that was the kind of world's leading ceramic 3D printing company, that was funded by Warren Buffett. And this was the world's largest 3D printed glazed ceramic object at the time in 2015. This is a long time ago. And this was the kind of cutting edge of their technology, and I kind of produced a lot of things with them. Unfortunately, it was dropped in Portland, in Oregon, so it no longer exists. But I used the opportunity of working with them to really explore as much as possible that material technology, but looking at it again from a very different aesthetic perspective. To still now people are kind of producing 3D printed ceramic with a kind of parametric-y type look, so it's just a kind of different vibe. I mean, this was called Jerusalem, and it was riffing off of the way Jerusalem was depicted in the background of early Renaissance paintings, so very different references to like the sort of parametric design. I still design objects to this day, including ones that are featured in the Barbie movie. So this was the only reason I put this design in is because I'm very proud of this. In the very beginning of the Barbie movie scene, the scene where she goes like, "Hey Barbie," and then everyone goes like, "Hey Barbie," the very first "Hey Barbie" in return to Barbie, that's the interior, and my lights are behind it, so I was very proud of that. Immediately on from that project, I was lucky enough to receive the UK Rome Prize for Architecture in 2014, which is another incredible opportunity. This time only available to one architect, young architect from the UK every year, to stay at the British Academy in Rome. And I did a project there which was looking at the city of Rome, but its alternative history. So doing a kind of 21st century grand tour, from the perspective, I guess, someone who likes gay Sir John Soane's aesthetics, and just collected a lot of stories that talked about a kind of different history of Rome that was much less weighty, serious than the one that's normally given. So, and each of these stories, which I collected, every dinner you'd sit next to someone amazing. I mean, one night I was sitting next to Phyllis Lambert, another night I'd be sitting next to some august archaeologist, and they would just tell me incredible stories that I could then go and research. And each one had a whole design and an animation and a story that was published on the Architectural Review. This one's the story of Valentino and his fight with McDonald's, opening the first McDonald's in Italy in front of his studio, which really pissed him off. It was the battle of the Reds, the McDonald's Red and Valentino's Red. But all of these stories, again, being reduced down to souvenirs, so objects. So each one of these ceramic objects that were with 3 different companies that I was getting with. One in Holland, one in Belgium, and one in the United States in Nebraska. And each one of these was a kind of reduction, a kind of distillation into a souvenir of all of these kind of complex stories and ideas. And that was displayed also in the Sir John Soane Museum after the British Academy. And I think very much in terms of objects, and I think of the city as a collection of objects. So I was just talking to a gentleman here about, he's doing an amazing project that we should all find out about lost buildings in London. But for me, the city is a collection of kind of wonderful jewels and gems and artifacts. And I'm one of those people that doesn't really understand maps in terms of roads. I go by landmarks. And so whenever I have an opportunity to design at the scale of the city, it's very much in that way of thinking of them, the city as a collection of objects, and I design objects for the city. Monuments, I think, are very, very much thought about in a similar way. Symbolic objects at the scale of the city, the way that you would have in your studio, unless I doubt you're all like the Medicis. But each of these projects are exploring that idea at as large a scale as possible. So each one's slightly different. One might be much more about the craft of the material, one might be more about the abstraction of color, one might be about the kind of ornamentation and symbolism. But they're all thinking about how can I make kind of super atmospheric objects that are they're so kind of potently atmospheric that they draw people to them. Like you cannot not notice them, but then straddling the line and trying not to be kind of offensively in your face. So there's a kind of balance there. This is a project that was just finished in Brighton. There's a very large new development there, and this is the main square in the centre. It's near Hove Station. That's kind of ceramics. And occasionally, I'll try and do that at a large scale whenever I can, including when I get to sort of layer symbols onto existing buildings. So this is Norman Foster's bridge that's famously the bridge towards the headquarters of the Secret Service in Andor, if anybody likes Star Wars. just outside of the Elizabeth Line station. It's, I really love Foster's work, and I really like this bridge, but so for me it's this kind of symbolic layering onto an existing monument of a kind of new story on top of it. And at each point in my career, I've tried to create opportunities for people to discuss the kind of topics or themes that I'm interested in, because I did find on a couple of these themes that there weren't the forums to be able to discuss them or be taken seriously when talking about them within the architecture world, in London specifically. So for instance, I found that my work ended up colourful. Pretty much all of it was using colour in different ways, and there wasn't a forum to discuss it, because whenever I would present my work, a lot of people would sort of ridicule or attack the colour. And so I had a conversation with Antoni Malinowski, who's an amazing artist who works at the architectural scale, has collaborated on many projects with Hayworth Tompkins, including the Everyman Theatre that won the Sterling Prize. And we set up the Saturated Space Research Group at the Architectural Association in 2011. We ran it for 10 years. And every year we had a big symposium where 5 people would come and give lectures, and then there were lots of opportunities in the rest of the day to have conversations about colour. And it was just a space specifically for architects to talk only about colour. And it was really wonderful, because a lot of architects would say, I never talked about it, just use it. And they had to think quite a lot before coming about how they would talk about it. And there was just a very, very positive buzz in all of those, and it did have quite a strong effect on the students who would attend. We also published a lot of texts on the website, and the videos are unfortunately down as of day before yesterday, because I didn't want to pay the Vimeo license anymore, because it got really expensive. But that also, these forums that I create also have a lot of effect on my work. So I never felt particularly confident about the colour that I was using, but I learned a lot from the other architects talking about colour in those forums, and I learned new ways of thinking about it, new ways of approaching about it, and it led to projects like the one in Paddington, which is just a pure study of colour and the way colour can affect an urban space, quite complicated, messy urban space, in a very kind of direct way, an inert way, just through the materiality, reflectivity, and kind of colours that are used in it, and how it interacts with the space throughout the year and the materials of the other buildings. And that's led to me now working on a book which will be coming out next year. You're the first people to see the cover, so I hope it's okay, called Chromatic Architecture. That's with the Royal Institute of British Architects, which will be coming out next year. And another kind of area of discussion was something that I guess was sort of implicit in my work, but did get attacked quite explicitly, which was the kind of gay side of things. It's definitely not something that encompasses all of my work at all, but it's there within it. And I was approached by, I started writing about the topic in that sort of 2018. And I wrote a piece for the Architecture Review in 2019 called the Prejudice Against Queer Aesthetics, which led to the Royal Institute, to RIBA Publishing calling me and asking if I'd like to do a book on queer spaces. I think it was specifically queer nightclubs in London. And I said no, but I don't want to do a book on those, but I would love to do a book on the history of queer spaces around the world in the kind of modern period. By modern, I mean sort of 1700 rather than sort of Corbusier onwards. And this was really important to me because I realized that looking back at university, quite a lot of my gay friends who were producing work that brought some of their identity aesthetically or kind of visually present into their work at university were laughed at and ridiculed and put down. That side of the work was put down until either a few of them left and just didn't want to be part of architecture, or they kind of ended up producing work that just looked exactly like the work of the tutors. And I, like a dog with a bone, I didn't accept all of the sort of ridicule, whatever, and I kept producing. But looking back, I realized actually it wasn't necessarily the tutor's fault. It was the absence of references. And just like with Wikipedia, you need citations in order to put something there. References are really important for humans to understand what is considered serious by a group of people. And whereas there's a plethora of books in the library about every great architect you can possibly imagine, if you look for spaces that are produced by specifically queer spaces, there's basically no book, or there was basically no book that you could use as a designer that was sort of complicated postmodern texts on the nature of sex in space, but there weren't sort of simple case studies that would guide you towards a canon of references that you could use as a designer. So the book attempts to be that. I thought, and it kind of was successful in the sense of the effect that it's had of students using it as a reference. And being a RIBA book, it's now, me and Josh, I co-wrote it with Josh Mardell, and 55 other contributors from all over the world. But we get, sort of every week, we get photos from tutors and students around the world who have the book open on their crit table with Post-it notes, sort of as a kind of justification for the basis of their projects. Just a few examples of the book. So this is Alan Boosbaum's, was a really incredibly successful and famous architect in New York in the 1970s, 1980s, who was a kind of queer, gay male pioneer of a lot of tropes that later became very fashionable. And he was sort of slightly forgotten. So the kind of breaking down of the barriers of privacy within spaces that became very annoying actually in the 90s, but was, and actually, yeah, probably just ended up being like those, bathtubs in the middle of bedrooms in hotels that I don't like now. But it sort of originated in this sort of really amazing queer scenario in New York. This was his studio. Upstairs where all the draftspeople would be working. Downstairs was where he slept. And then shared by everyone was the kind of jacuzzi pool. And I think there was a kind of probably an apocryphal saying of, don't trust a client until you've been naked in the bath with them. Very, very not Me Too. I don't think this would not work nowadays in terms of normal power dynamics and working relationships in an office, but it was very much kind of radical at the time. And also the use of ceramic tiles of different colors, so kind of cheap industrial ceramic tiles of different colors, creating a kind of slick aesthetic, which became really picked up in postmodernism later. A lot of postmodern architects took that from Boosbaum, but it was directly used in a way that his clients, many of them gay men, would know, because it was referring to the bathhouses and the toilets of the MTA where people would cruise, and many of his clients would cruise in New York. And an important part of the book is to show that we believe that there is no such thing as a queer aesthetic. There's just queer people in different scenarios and different situations in different places in the world at different times, responding to different stimuli. And so this is going from Alan Boosbaum to Dracula's Den, which was a house that was made by two Japanese clients, two people that made one client in Japan. One was an artist, one was a salon owner. And this was in the late 90s. It was a kind of supposed to be a golden period of gay representation in Japan, where there were lots of gay people on television, but these people who commissioned the house felt that there was a kind of pressure, a normative pressure on them to be a kind of stereotype that implied this sort of happy, colourful, clappy, type of gay person that was loud and out, and they were not like that at all, and they felt this pressure to be like this sort of character that they saw on television, and they wanted to get away from it. So they commissioned this house that they wanted to have no ornament, no decoration, and no windows. Actually, by law, even in a barn, there has to be one window in the roof, so there's one window in the roof, but they wanted no doors, they wanted no walls. They wanted to completely escape all of the pressure to be that type of person that they felt the stereotype was of gay people in Japan at the time. And then going back to the 1750s, you had the very, very famous Eleanor Butlin and Miss Ponsonby, the ladies of Llangollen. In Wales, are two aristocratic Irish ladies who decamped to live together in a lesbian lifestyle in the first cottage ornée, which made the Gothic style incredibly gay and queer after that, where I believe everything was female in the house, and even the cat was called Sappho, I think. And they became very famous. So everyone knew that was a lifestyle. They knew they were, now we have the term lesbians, but they were thought of as sort of very close friends in more than that way. But people actually had postcards. So those were sold all over the country, and people had postcards of them in their houses because they were such celebrities. And this, again, in the British theme of the kind of Gothic as a gay style. This was, I believe that he had the largest fortune at the time, or one of the largest fortunes at the time in the United Kingdom. It was William Beckford, who wrote Gothic novels, and he built this absolutely gigantic house called Fonthill Abbey, where he lived alone, out of this fortune that he inherited from his father, where he would sort of write Gothic novels and sort of swan around on his own, being very, disconsolate and full of ennui. Embodying, I guess, this idea that a society that didn't want him, that would probably send him into exile or kill him if they found out that he was a buggerer, pushed him to create an alternative world. And that's something that we find through all of the queer spaces. Wherever they are in the world, there's always this idea of creating an alternative world, even if it's momentarily in a city on a side street with a sexual encounter, but this idea of creating a space where you're accepted. Just to show, because I like big things, so I love skyscrapers, but that's really, really giant. I believe it was second tallest tower in the United Kingdom at the time, possibly, but it fell down 6 times. So James Wyatt, good architect, maybe not the best engineer, the tower collapsed 6 times and actually ate up the entire fortune and left him destitute by the end of it. So it's kind of one of these very kind of metaphorical stories. And we also have a lot of examples of spaces which are telling the stories of people who didn't have wealth, who couldn't create the spaces with lots of money, the way that, for instance, Eleanor Ponsonby and William Beckford could. That's the Hotel Gondolin in Buenos Aires, which is a squat, which they're currently in legal negotiation to actually purchase right now, but it's an old hotel where the trans community, or trans people, mostly from the north of Argentina, which is more socially conservative, would end up on the streets of Buenos Aires. They could make their way to the hotel, and there's a social structure there, organized like a family, where people could come, they could make sure that they could get education, they could get healthcare, get all the certificates that they needed, and given a supportive environment which would keep them away from drugs and abuse on the streets. And that's a kind of wonderful human story, and that's a cruising ground in Mexico City in the middle of the great federal university, which has been going strong for about 50 years. And I've been lucky to have projects. This is the entrance ticketing performance space of the Triennial at the National Gallery in Victoria. About 1.5 million people went through that. The photos were taken before it was open, but it was very busy all the time. And every night there were performances here, drag queen performances, and other performances. But there was one night I remember, I couldn't go because it was COVID, but I got a video of a drag queen draped over that with disco ball lights going, singing very seductively a version of Kylie's I Should Be So Lucky. And I was like, I don't need to do any other project. This is, I've made it. This is what I've always wanted to do. But I tell myself I keep doing things until I can actually do something like this where I get to visit it in person. And these are projects that have directly come kind of the explorations of queer history that I was running in parallel to that book, and which I've continued since then. This was an installation at Kew Gardens, a pavilion in Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games, which moved around the city actually, celebrating the history of gender diversity in our various Commonwealth states. This was in now gone gay bar in Coventry. This was a window installation there, just as in the last year when it was closed. And this is a project looking at the use of different materials combined to create a soft femme aesthetic that's very soft on the body. And sometimes I just have fun. I mean, these are kind of like naughty chairs that look like bits of the body. I'm not sure if any of you can see like which bits of the body, but like they're there. This is another naughty project that's like, it's a glory hole. I mean, there's like splattered kind of stuff on it. And this was a project I presented to an Italian client, and I say, well, what is this? I'm like, no, it's a chair, but it wants to eat your bum right up, and he, this is so great, and I got the project. So I get to do some silly things as well, which is very enjoyable in relation to those themes. One gets to get away with quite a lot. Another theme that runs through my work is that I'm not able to explore that often is ornament. I have a great fascination, passion, and love for ornament. I see it as a kind of, within the world of architecture and design, it's something that brings disparate cultures and countries and traditions together rather than separating. I see there's for a very long time now, there's been a lot of discourse from various people, like on the right or on the left. And one side, it's about nativism and we're the best, and this is British architecture, and this is British tradition. Or on the other side, it's all about the local, and let's make bricks from mud from the stream next to the house, and because everything has to be local. And then we're referencing the sort of semi-industrial building down the road. And I, also my family background is sort of all over the place, but I do genuinely love the way that you can look at ornamental tropes and motifs, and they connect the most widely different cultures. So for instance, the history, I love porcelain, I love ceramics, and the history of porcelain and its ornamentation is the most epic kind of 400-year, actually it goes much further back than that, but the kind of the relationship of porcelain and Rococo is a kind of 400-year backwards and forwards between China, China and all of the Western European states, and how they would misunderstand each other, and something would go from China to Holland, and then Holland they would try and do decoration that looked like it was Chinese, and then a lot of those would end up as ballast back in China, and the Chinese thought that that's what Europeans wanted from their ornaments, so they would do a version of that Dutch people trying to do Chinese ornament, and then that would become something that then the Europeans thought was really fantastic, and then through over kind of 150 years you end up with the Rococo in this sort of bizarre mishmash of kind of backwards and forwards. And pretty much every major kind of ornamental motif has stories like that, or every style has stories like that that bring cultures together. And this is part of my great love of postmodern architecture, not postmodernism necessarily as a kind of philosophical movement, which I don't necessarily have that great passion for, but the architectural style, because it does have this great joy of mixing. It really is about, at its best, the kind of removal of categories and the kind of the joy of creating, fusing different things together. And this, I wrote 2 books with Terry. I mean, one's an updated version of the previous one. First was Revisiting Postmodernism, and then Postmodernism Architecture That Changed Our World, which came out last year, which was just an incredible process of about a year and a half just having conversations with Terry about, first of all, how he came to that style, why it meant so much to him, and how important it was throughout kind of architectural history, especially in the United Kingdom, and how it is a great way, reading those texts and studying those architects producing architecture at that time, it's a great way of breaking out of silos that we tend to sort of slip into quite easily. And it's difficult to find projects where I can actually explore ornament because there's a budgetary question. But for instance, furniture projects, sometimes I get to explore quite detailed. Abed Laminati, this is using their new high-pressure laminate machine, high-quality printers, in a spatial way on furniture objects. And sometimes at larger scale. I mean, I'd like to be doing it at a scale of skyscrapers, but an obelisk is fine, it's enough. This was a proposal for an extension to the British Library on Euston Road. Very practical, I'm sure that they would go for it. But it was me imagining, it was when they announced the Roger Stirk Harbour and Partners extension at the back between the Francis Crick and the main library, that I thought, okay, I just sort of imagine something on the main road. And it's this idea again of I guess, thinking about architecture that is highly ornamental, that has a greater level of aesthetic difference, but sort of material fineness to it at a large scale that's very monumental, sort of, I guess, unashamedly monumental. And I've done that through lots of imaginary projects. This was actually semi-imaginary. This was a commission for Barcelona, so it was in the Architecture Festival in the main park there, where there's the Grand Arch. There was sort of a QR code, so you could see this with your phones, sort of huge in the actual city. And then bit by bit, I've had the opportunity to projects, mostly using ceramics, but I guess whatever materials I can find budget for in the City of London at certain level of scale. This is the maternity ward in Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, where the whole ward, interiors, exteriors, reception areas were transformed or sort of changed just through cladding, just through decoration. And similarly, the public areas of a central Bristol development from the early 1970s that were sort of just stained concrete that I decorated with, again, very affordable ceramic tiles, directly referencing Alan Boosbaum, Alan Boosbaum's work, and sort of taking his kind of robust and affordable decoration. This is in a project in London Bridge Station. It's a 57-metre long hostile vehicle mitigation barrier between the bus stop and the Thameslink viaduct, which was just covered in like pea, basically. And I worked with the London School of Mosaics for 3 years, created the mosaic with hundreds of different workshops with people from old age homes, young offenders groups, and dozens of school classes, all of whom produced their own little part of the mosaic. So it was designed specifically so that it could be made by people who literally would have an hour introduction and then they would have half a day to produce their bit of mosaic. So it's actually very low quality mosaic. But everybody can kind of come now and visit and see their little part of the mosaic, which it took a very long time to do, but it's now complete. And last time I was there was one of the local schools visiting, and it was the school kids, and they were all kind of finding their little bit and taking photos of it that they had made. So it's kind of decoration and ornament with a kind of tactile crafted quality, but then that's engaging with specific kind of community groups in the area. This is Underpass in Plumstead project. That's a 2,400 metre mural. We're also redoing the staircases and the spaces underneath it. And this, that's my dog, Mumu. She comes to my meetings. That's with the facade contractors. But this is a project in Croydon, which I guess was a first opportunity to produce really at scale, taking a lot of these ideas just coming together, but again in a way where it's not needed, it's not necessary to explain anything, right? It sort of does what it says on the tin, effectively. Each one of these are handmade. So if you can see that these are done up in Telford. There's 16,000 tiles. Each one is 3.5 kilos. They're each about this big. They're all a bit wonky. They're all hand dipped. The glaze is very thick. And there's a kind of incredibly tactile quality to them, which is very different to the usual extruded cladding which you get on buildings. And you see people touching it very often as you walk past it, and it really does interact with the light a lot, and it integrates into the city in a way which you almost don't notice it, but if you notice it, you will never forget it. So I'm quite happy with this project in terms of how it integrates in the city but provides something new. And this is something that just finished like a week ago. It's in central Birmingham, the main subway underneath the Queensway to the jewellery quarter, if any of you know Birmingham, just by Snow Hill. It's several thousand tiles. Every single tile is different, and it creates a kind of elevation that has a trompe-l'oeil three-dimensional effect to it. Okay, so I'm just ending on a note for the merchandise. It will be an advert, and just to end with two endorsements by architects that I really look up to. The Peter Barber, the great Peter Barber, and the great John Outram wearing my hat and a t-shirt from the website. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Before I open up the floor, I'm just interested in, you talked just a little bit about people who inspired you, and I kept thinking Paolozzi sometimes when I looked at, and so he presumably is.
So normally my first slide is actually the Tottenham Court Road ceramics.
Right.
I removed it. There were way too many slides, so I had to remove some of them. But yeah, I mean, I basically got into like the arts, or I guess the creative industries initially, just from all of the like integrated art around London. So I mean, the London Underground's always been like an obsession with mine, and Tottenham Court Road Station particularly was like this magic cave that from very young I just found absolutely incredible, and particularly those 6 archways that used to be at the top of the escalators that were sadly lost. They're now in plastic bags in Edinburgh. But I have so many photos of it. I have so many memories of that kind of the world's largest mosaic artwork, I believe, something like that. And then when I went to architecture school, I discovered who he was. I actually basically didn't know who Paolozzi was. I just knew that station. And I went to architecture school and discovered, obviously, you know, his ideas and the rest of his work, and visited his preserved studio up in Edinburgh. And was hugely inspired by him. That's just finding amazing people to work with. So I've just got I've been lucky to meet like fantastic fabricators, factories, craftspeople, and I work with them. So whenever I have, so there's the knowledge that I've learned from them. So if I'm doing a project and I'm thinking of a specific supplier or fabricator in mind, I kind of know what they can do. But very often, if I got a commission, I will find who I'm going to work with before I do any designing, and discuss with them ideas, and then we prototype and we produce little tests. So in a way, it's very much a collaboration. So I don't like. I mean, I have the town hall and the kind of silly library extension idea. Those are whatever. But when I actually have a potential real project, I don't do that kind of thing and then say, let's try and make it. I craft something with.
Do you think it's the architecture training that's coming into play? You're like, okay, I've got a concept, guys.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like pretty much everything, like my way of working is entirely from my training. It's from the teachers who taught me at university. It's from the people I worked for. And it's totally from the architectural background. And also I find it really difficult, like I can't design unless I have constraints, which is like, that's how so I get sometimes I get clients and they're like, dream something up, and I can't. I need to know what the limits are, I need to know what's the site, what's the budget, like limitations, always. Yeah.
Process.
Well, no, I don't really. That there is just illustrations and it's commercial now. I don't really share the stuff the way I used to, but I did that because it was a way of, I guess, me constantly rediscovering what I really like in architecture. Because I think I wanted to go into architecture. I wanted to go into the arts because the city was full of like accessible and approachable art that was not the YAs in the Royal Academy that was like you had to read 300 texts to understand what on earth they were about. They were just like really lovely decorative things in the city, but similarly architecture, it was just like, it was an outdoor museum. I could just go around and enjoy the buildings, and then I could go online or go to a library and learn about them, and it was so joyful. And as a kind of like fat, lonely, awkward kid, the buildings were like my friends, and it was amazing. And then I went to architecture school, and there was a lot of like them trying to tell you that that's terrible, and that's awful, and that you can't like that, and that's disgusting, and that's like, not allowed, and that's kitsch, or whatever, and everybody had particular hatreds, and I genuinely just liked all of it, and I didn't quite understand that. So there was a kind of constant process which I shared online of me seeing that and hearing that, and then kind of, I guess, opposing it with the joy of just showing lots of different things that I loved. And I think I was called Panglossian a few times, as in like uncritical, and that I liked everything, which is fine, but it was me sort of, I guess, trying to share the joy of what good architecture was, and that's why I liked being in the industry. So it's kind of as simple as that. And then actually the architectural icons came from that, because during COVID we were trapped indoors, it was horrible, or like walking nearby, and I just missed all those buildings that I liked taking photos of and drawing. So I just started to like visit them on Google and then draw them on Rhino and then make illustrations from them. So like a business came out of that, which is a bit weird. To find the color palettes, first of all, materials. So it depends on the materials that I'm using for the project. So if I've got a client, God, I hate competitions because they're ideally it's a commission, and then I can understand exactly what the client wants and what their budget is and the time frame and what's viable and where it's going to happen and what lead times are possible. Then I'll pick the material, and even if it's within ceramic, it's like what type of ceramic, because the colors vary wildly depending on if it's a decal, is it a digital decal, it's a screen print, is it going to be glazed, what type of glaze, is it high-fied, low-fied. And so there's a bit before I get to the color palette stage, there's normally quite a long process. But then once I'm there, it just entirely relates to the project. So like, is it in the city? Where in the city is it? And what is the direct context of it? So the color palette will normally relate directly to the context. So the kind of the most brightly colorful ones that you saw on there tend to be in very gray office districts. And they're intentionally bright, obviously with the client responding to that and wanting that. And then the Croydon one, for instance, it's more subtle, because the context it's messier. It doesn't necessarily need something that sort of stands out. It needs something, I think, that was a little bit more immersive in a gentle way that can be appreciated without adding to the mess, effectively. So the context second after that, and then third is what colours I'm into at the time. Get into the design through those stories. It's how I can get very excited about them, and I make a world, and that just sort of carries me along for the research process, I guess. But then I really do like putting things out into the world that are just what they are, and they don't have a kind of weight to them. They're just light, and they're just consumable, and they are what people want them to be, which has led to people sort of, I guess, also ridiculing stuff, and certain people like finding it very superficial because there's not necessarily any depth that's put out there. But I do. The young people who are just finishing university, go work for other people because you can make mistakes on their time. Sorry, Kenny, it's like what I was doing with you. Make mistakes when they're paying, and then you go out and you sort of start up your own business, and you don't make those mistakes, but use all the knowledge that you got when you're working for other people.
Very good. So what's the website address?
It's architectural.-icon.
Yeah, knitting is a big thing from your mother then.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you very much. And if you'd like to thank